good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. You're very welcome to the official launch of A Man with a Mission, Dr. Tom Walsh, Harnessing the Power of Science for Irish Agriculture. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Mark Gibson. I work in the Knowledge Transfer Directorate in Teagasc. And between now and 5 o'clock, we will hear insights into one of Ireland's most distinguished agricultural scientists, Dr. Tom Walsh, who has been described as the single most influential figure in the development of Ireland's renowned agricultural research infrastructure, which has shaped today's globally successful Irish agri-food industry. The book provides a fascinating summary of Dr. Tom's personal and professional life, from his birth at the outbreak of World War I, his graduation from UCD in 1936, to his time as director of Foras, Taluntais and ACOT. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce the authors of the book to you, Dr. Tom Walsh's daughter, Rosemary Buckley, and Dr. Ned Culleton, former principal officer with Foras Taluntais. And we're also joined by the director of Teagasc, Professor Jerry Boyle, who will formally launch the book today. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. I hope you're keeping well. It's warm everywhere in the country today, so we do appreciate you stepping inside from the glorious weather we're having today. Rosemary, how are you today?
Very well, thank you. Not too bad.
Good, good. And Ned, how are you doing?
Good, I'm good, Mark.
Very good. And Professor Boyle, you're joining us from Tipperary this afternoon, I believe.
Yeah, from West Tipperary, Rare Cross, in fact.
Rare Cross, right on the border there.
We won't say a word. And it gets, as you know, it gets honorable mention in the book. So
yes.
I'm delighted about that.
Very good, very good. Well, before we move to, we're going to have a conversation with Rosemary, and Ned is going to share some insights about the book. As also, we have a short video that we'd like to share with you from some archive footage. We do apologize, some of the sound isn't perfect, but we do hope you enjoy it. So we'll share that with you now.
We put him into the commerce class. He did the last term that year. He did all of the next year. And when the results came out and were published in the press, we found that Thomas had got first place in Ireland in commerce. I think I can safely say that he was probably the cleverest fellow that ever went through secondary school in the Christian Brothers in Wexford. I must say that Tom Walsh was as grand a fella as I ever met. He never got above himself, and he was a nice, simple fella all the time, and it leaves him so still.
But the Institute of itself is a tremendous mark for the ability and the effort and the energy that a man like Dr. Walsh has put into the national development of this country.
He was a man of genius, really, a man of tremendous work capacity, driving power.
So it's with a certain amount of awe and enormous pleasure that I now unveil this rock to Dr. Walsh.
A research centre, a soil testing centre, number one. It came from that. Then a research centre
which gradually over the years gathered momentum and I think it reached a very important meaning in Europe in particular, and after the war it was new things being done. Soil science, for instance, at that time was gaining momentum again after the war, and in 1952 it was shown very well by 1952 when the International Society of Soil Science decided to hold meetings in Dublin, and that I think was very important for this country. There are certain things that along the way that point to things. It was one of the situations, and at that meeting we were able to make a number of quite substantial scientific contributions. They came here, they visited the country and so on. Yeah. And that was the time when the whole question of identifying the land of our country, of beginning to classify it, beginning to understand it, was a most important step. Not so much the soil testing, not all that, but the beginning the work on the classification of the soils of this country at that time. It began then. We had practically no experience about grassland work. Yeah. And here we had to begin to move from a subsistence agriculture. 95% of the soils phosphorus deficient, 85% potassium deficient, using 3,000 or 4,000 ton of nitrogenous fertilizer a year. Yeah. All of that was there. Yeah. And we showed that very clearly and by publishing at the time, but that was the situation. That was what subsistence agriculture had led to, the despoilation of the land of this country over generations. And we had got the land, and my perception of it was we got the land, and we didn't make enough use of it. I am not criticizing people on that, because there were reasons there. There was no market for produce. You depended on somebody buying. You were at the mercy of a lot of people, merchants and other people who bought what they thought they should buy from you, offered you so much for a small animal you brought to the fair. You were the prisoner of a tremendous number of circumstances, and some of these situations linger on still.
Nobody can deny that this has been a very happy place to work. It's productive and it's happy. And that's the environment that was created. That's the ethos of this place. And if you look for success in a place, you must look there. You can have good scientists, you can have all the other things. But if people don't work together, don't know how to work together, and don't work for one another, there's nothing. There's nothing at all.
I was saying some lovely memories there of the Doc Walsh there, and I'm sure it brings back lots of memories for many of you, those who knew him. What I'd like to do now is maybe talk to Rosemary about your memories of your father. But maybe first off, if you could share with us what the motivation was for writing this book in the first place.
Well, after that, quite emotional, but well, it was at the unveiling of the commemorative plaque in Wexford, in Pearsestown, the National School, on a wet October day in 2018. That really made me decide, right, I've got to do something. I've been thinking about it for a long time, and but really didn't know where to start. But we were sitting there waiting for the procedure to go ahead, and lots of ideas went through my mind, thoughts. Here we were back where it all started. Dad just having been born a few hundred meters down the road from this school. The children in the school, would they know who he was? Would they understand? And my own children and my own grandchildren would go and ask those sort of questions as well. And I also felt I wanted to put it on records. The seminal soil research that was started and instigated by Tom Walsh in Johnstown Castle, and the opportunities that all that gave to the people in the locality. It created jobs for them, and for many years, because this research started in the late 40s and went on through up to the 70s, until we had a soil map of every inch of the land in Ireland. So it was a lot of employment there for the locality. It was also then, as it went on to the 50s, when Foras Taluntais was formed in 1958, there was a nucleus then of highly qualified scientists from Johnstown who were then sent over different areas in Ireland to set up new research stations. So it was like a nursery for all intents and purposes. So it was all of that. And then finally, when I was listening to Professor Jerry Boyle's speech that day, it really hit me again what achievement Dad had and what he had done and how he had devoted his whole life to science, agriculture, and to Ireland as well. So I just felt I had to move and do something and write it all down, if only for the people in the area, from, you know, his life and his work and what he meant to us. So that was the urgency of doing the book.
And this was your first time as an author, and in a pandemic. How was that experience? How did you find that?
Making the decision was the easy part. Now I had to find somebody to help me, not having done it ever before. So the first person that came to mind was Dr. Ned Culleton. I knew he was from Wexford. I knew he was Pearsestown. I knew he had worked on Foras Taluntais. I knew he was a prodigious writer of books. So I took the bull by the horns and wrote him a letter and explained what I was thinking of doing. So he very kindly came back to me almost immediately and says, yes, he'd love to do it with me. So that's when the fun started.
And
so,
we all know or have memories of the doc in his professional capacity, but as his daughter, how did you perceive him during all of those achievements, or those years of achievements?
well, there's a kind of chapter in the book. There's a number of us in the family have written about him as a family, as the dad. And for me, as his daughter, he was always a gentle, loving father. He was a proud Wexford man and instilled in us this connection to Wexford that we all have in the family. What else?
How did you, or where do you think he found his drive? And I mean, I think the title of the book is couldn't be more apt. A man with a mission. He really, from reading about him, it truly was a man with a mission. Where do you get that? Where do you think he got that focus and that drive?
I think because of where he came from, and a small farm. He always said he was lucky enough, the people of Wexford, because he got scholarship. He felt it was the people of Wexford who gave him the opportunity to go to college. Therefore, he always felt that he had something to give back. He always said that. And also he felt very strongly within himself that he had the idea of where it needed to go, and he was the man to do it. And that's what drove him. Often I thought, why was he in such a rush? But then looking back at those days when he was born, life expectancy for parents was sort of 50 to 60. His parents had died early. So maybe in the back of his head was, I just need to keep going and get this done. But he always said there's a job of work to be done for the country. We heard it at home, and I'm sure an awful lot of people will recognize that phrase who worked with him, because that was what drove him. And a couple of times there'd be notices in the paper, Dr. Walsh leaving for this wonderful amount of money, going foreign. And we'd say, right, Dad, what's this about? And he'd say, I'm never going to leave. Don't relieve everything you read in the newspapers. So that's really what he was about. It was what he could do for Ireland, and he felt he had the wherewithal to do it. And people seemed to get that from him, get that urgency from him. Yeah. Now, he also loved a party and a relaxed time, so he wasn't all about work. especially at Christmas time when our musical cousins would come, the stories, sing song, and a glass of wine in the hand. That was him, relaxed. So I think that's probably covers that question.
Yeah, no, really strong sense of public service there. There's no questioning that. And his passion for science, innovation, and public service, has that passed on to the next generation, can I ask?
Well, none of us followed him into agriculture, that was for sure. We couldn't follow that. So Terry, my brother, he studied medicine and went into pathology and hematology and built up a body of work there. We have an engineer who works in science and development with medical device company. And I suppose we all looking at us, we were all innovative in our own way as to the careers we chose and where we went to study abroad. And like a lot of families, we have some of our family are in Australia, others in California and in Europe. We're scattered around a bit now. But he always gave us an openness of mind and a curiosity. So we've just gone our own ways.
Really so important, that curiosity, isn't it?
Yeah.
What impact do you think, or do you hope that this book will have?
Well, for the children in the school is really what started me on it. I would hope he'd be a role model for them to say, no matter where you are, where you come from, you can follow your dream. That also the people in the locality would know more about him. But really what my real dream would be is that by publishing this book, it would encourage somebody to do more in-depth study of his scientific work, what he has handed down. His scientific papers are in 2 large volumes, which may be a start. But from that point of view, we haven't covered that in any great depth in the book. But it's really his legacy, his scientific legacy. Mm-hmm. I'd love if somebody expanded that. That's about it.
Well, thanks so much for that, Rosemary. And I'm really looking forward to I'm working my way through the book, but it really is a fascinating read and inspiring individual, I think is probably the best way to describe Tom Walsh. I'm now going to move to Ned Culleton, who worked alongside Tom Walsh, and Ned was Principal Research Officer on Foras Taluntais. Ned, you're welcome to today's webinar. Can you hear us okay?
Shall I start, Mark?
Yeah, so Ned, you're going to share some thoughts and insights about Doc Walsh, and we're just going to hand over to you, and just to let people know if they do have any comments that they'd like to leave, you can use the Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen. We'd be delighted to hear any comments or questions that you might have, and we'll be providing you details about how to order the book later on. But Ned, we'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Mark. Mark said, I come from the same part of the world as Doc Walsh, from South Wexford. In fact, he came from a place called the Barony of Forth. And not many people will know this now, but I know because I'm from the same background. He was very proud to be a man of the Barony of Forth. And I'll tell you very briefly why. It had an effect on him all his life. It bolstered him in a certain way. And his people would have originally, I can go back a bit further than Rosemary, they would have come from Saxony in the 11th century, came to England, and they were forced from England into Wales. And they came from Wales into Ireland in the beginning of and the end of the 12th century, and they had a totally different culture to the people in Ireland. They had a different method of agriculture, which of course this was dear to the Doc's heart, and why he was so interested. and glad to be from the barony of Forth. They were tillage farmers, whereas, of course, the Irish were cattle farmers. And these people who came, they were given small farms in South Wexford, baronies of Forth and Bargy. And they were noted from, at least from the 16th century on, there are accounts of how brilliant they were as farmers and the type of farming that they practiced and how enterprising that they were. And it was borne out from the accounts given by various scholars and all of the people. And they had their own language there as well, actually. It only died out in the 18th century. So the doc was very proud to come from that background. And it may have affected him. I heard something recently. One of the ways it may have affected him, of course, he was determined to follow his science. He was a real scientist at heart, and he would follow that. He liked it so much that in doing his graduate work, he actually stole into the laboratory at night. He used to leave the window open, and he'd go over in the evening or night and open the window and hop in and do his brilliant research on the characteristic of Irish soils. That's the sort of man he was. And it may have stemmed, I may be stretching it a bit, but it may have something from the origins of these Saxons. And the other point was that he was a lecturer in soil science in UCD, but he also lectured everybody else because he had this vision for Ireland, and he wanted to put it into effect of bolstering the agriculture so that the people would have a decent living. And he spoke loudly, he spoke often, and he spoke to everyone that would listen, politicians, farmers, advisors, you name it. So after 10 years, he was heard. He was always talking about soil testing. We must do soil testing and we must do soil survey. So in 1945, it would have been, the Secretary of the Department of Agriculture called him in. Sit down there, Tom. You're always banging on about this soil testing business. There's a farm down in Wexford now, 950-acre farm with a castle and lovely stone buildings. You go down there now and start your damned soil analysis, soil testing. And I know I'm exaggerating all that, of course. It wasn't like that at all. But he was charged at that time with setting up the soil testing facilities in Ireland. And that was his first big challenge. And of course, he proved it. He proved it the man that he was. He could do practically anything. He could. But anyway, there he was. He was back in the barony of Forth. He was king of the castle, and he had the whole place in his own parish. Actually, his own home was only the puck of a schlitter from the Johnstown estate. Sorry to mention that, Jerry, after last Sunday, but anyway, and actually he organised that the club would get that ground later on for the games, and that's where the club is based to this day, on the Johnstown Castle estate. We bought the land, of course, eventually. The other and much more important thing about Doc Welsh that I think and know a little bit about was that he was a Republican socialist. And he said that on many occasions in public. He made no bones about it. He was a self-professed Republican for sure. He remembered the War of Independence, actually. And he used to tell the story of when he was only a young lad, I'd say 6 or 7 years of age, in the classroom, when a man came in carrying a gun, and he put the gun up against the wall and he began to sing songs for the young fellas. And Doc remembered that. And I sat in that very same classroom some years later, not that many, because the Doc wasn't much older than myself. But I sat there, and in that same room at the very moment, the day we're holding this launch, Doc Welsh's book is now being sold. The very same place. It's a wonderful coincidence. The school became a part of a supermarket, of course. That's why the book was on sale. And I have to say that the people at Pearsestown are buying it up much better even than we could have imagined. And that's wonderful for us. Doc would have been very pleased, I think, with the coincidences I mentioned there. But his republicanism, he translated his republican into a mission. As T.K. Whitaker said about him, he was a man with a mission. And his mission was to transform agriculture in Ireland so that the farmers and all the people would make a decent living from the land. That's the man he was, and that was his republicanism, to work for that. And he spent nearly all his life working for that, on that mission. He was also a socialist, as Tom O'Dwyer very delicately put it. He had leanings towards socialism. So had my father. I see you smile, Jerry. So had my father. He was also had leanings towards socialism. And my father used to hold meetings in Doc Welsh's house where they would discuss all these issues. This is the early 20s now I'm talking about. Socialism was kind of in the air at the time, you know. And but the Doc often said to me, when we'd be alone, he'd always say, Ned, I want you to know that I learned my Republican socialism at those meetings between your father and my father. And I was very proud of that, and I still am. He was an admirer of Liam Mellows, as the people in Athenry campus will know. And Mellows, of course, was also a socialist and drafted plans for the Ireland that he would like to see when Ireland became free. And Liam Mellows, of course, was very active in the Civil War. He died, he was shot later, of course, and very sadly, because he had a big contribution to make to Ireland. So I think it's easy to see, if anyone that would know the Doc especially, those two things, those two isms, played a big part in his thinking. So what can I say about the man? Well, I grew up hearing about him from the time I was about 6. And I later saw him in action, of course, because he gave me a job in Johnstown Castle in 1950. In fact, I remember the question he asked me, interviewing me. He asked me, could I describe the structure of the atom? Now, this was 5 years after America dropped the bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. So luckily I had some idea any of it. At least he took me on anyway. I see the Doc as a visionary. He really was a visionary, looking to the future. And I think he knew he had the ability to do something very positive about it. And that's what he did. But he was an expansive character. And I want to give you an example of this from my own experience. On Board-na-Mona, when the bogs in Ireland, the cutaway bogs, were running out, and the Doc and Board-na-Mona were wondering what would they do. So the Doc set up a few experiments down in the bog in Clonsast. And that's where I worked for a while. One of the crops we grew was potatoes. And I remember 1956 it was, when there was a fantastic crop of potatoes we had there, because we gave them the full manuring, you know. And the Doc came down anyway one day, unexpected, in June, when those potatoes were looking absolutely wonderful. Ker's pinks in full bloom they were. And the Doc was there, and with those important people from Board-na-Mona, trying to work out some way of using the bogs when they were completely finished. And I remember the Doc pointing to the potatoes in bloom. And then he pointed to a cooling tower. And he said, you see those potatoes, those drills of potatoes? I can visualize drills of potatoes from here to that cooling tower. Now, when I tell you that cooling tower was 3 miles away, it'll give you some idea of the Doc's, of his expansive, that's the way he thought. He thought big, not small. He was a natural leader, of course. That was obvious to us all. He was gifted. He was charismatic. He was a supreme motivator. But he was also a very tough man. I have to tell you that. Now, he was tough. He was tough as a young hurler in Wexford, because the lads used to say about him, what did they say? I can't remember exactly now. Oh, he asked no questions, and I've lost it. Anyway, he showed his toughness really when the institute was set up, because the bill was very poorly drafted, and there was ructions, the only word to describe them, between the Department of Agriculture and the Agricultural Institute, because the Institute, and Doc Welsh, of course, in particular, but he had a very good chairman, John Litton, with him at that time too. Doc maintained that the Agricultural Institute was the only body set up to do agricultural research in Ireland. And of course, the Department of Agriculture didn't agree with that. They saw themselves as overseeing all that. So there were terrible rows, absolutely terrible rows between the Institute and the department. It went on for several years. The Doc wouldn't give an inch. He never gave an inch. And the rows were so bad that they were referred at one time to on Taoiseach, the great Sean Lemass. Doc still wouldn't give in. The Doc tried, Sean Lemass tried to pour oil on troubled waters, but it didn't work. But eventually the rows fizzled out anyway. I suppose maybe they all got tired of it, and everybody moved on. But it was said at the time, one of the officials in the Department of Agriculture said at the time, Jesus, if we don't stop Tom Walsh, we'll have 2 departments of agriculture. So that tells you about how the others, how they saw him. Now, about the staff. He was never dictatorial. Neither was he too benign. But his role changed over the years, actually. I saw him in Johnstown, where he knew all the researchers, and he would come down regularly, and he would get them into their office or wherever, and he would argue with them for maybe an hour or 2 hours. I saw it happening myself, and we knew what he was doing. He was making sure that they were understood, and of course he had a very broad vision of the research, which he could pass on to those people, and that motivated them as well. And he, as I say, but the thing was as well, he was demanding of the staff. He was no soft man to work for. And Pierce Ryan also said the same thing, and Pierce worked with him for many years. But he was a facilitator, and that's how he saw himself in the Agricultural Institute more, I think, than in earlier years, because his administrative duties took over a lot from him, and he couldn't get as close to the researchers as he would have liked. But the researchers, there was no such thing as, like the Hollywood thing of ars gratia artis. Each researcher had a project, and that was to further the work of the Agricultural Institute some way or another. And Doc would query them on that and make sure that they kept on the right road. And the other great thing about him was that when that piece of research was done, he made sure that the results, and I'm sure, Jerry, you've done the same thing, that the results get to the farmer, to the advisor, and to anybody to whom it was of interest, or who could use that information. Now, his relations with the staff were very good, very good. But when money became scarce in the 70s, there were rumblings among the researchers, of course, because there were huge cuts in the money. And believe it or not, the biggest cut of all, the unkindest cut of all, if you like, was for Johnstown, the Johnstown budget. And the staff in Johnstown were extremely worried because they heard of what their grant was going to be by some means. And they knew that if that went through, the research in Johnstown would be practically finished. So, as I put it, the spirit of 1798 became evident in Wexford again. And the research staff decided to march on headquarters and to confront the doc with their problem. And that's what they did. And there's a little story, now I don't want to take away from the heroics of it, but there's a little story that the doc, he must have been tipped that they were coming in through the gates. You'll remember the gates, Jerry. And the doc was looking through a window as they rounded the bend and came advancing on headquarters. There was a man called Mick Harkin, who was a bit of a wag, and Mick is reputed to have said to the doc, "Is it your birthday, Doc?" The doc wasn't amused, I can tell you, because he knew he had to face the 98 men in the office. But anyway, it all went well. It all went well. The budget was increased, but I must say that the men from Johnstown, they were very heroic. They were the only ones that ever took on Doc Welsh like that, and it paid off. Their budget was increased, and their research did not die. So I think that is a good lot to be said for that. I'm going to finish now with a few things. Doc was a man of the people, of course. He never changed. You know, when he was in the Royal Irish Academy, he was secretary of the research committee. And Frank Mitchell, whom I worked under, he was on the committee as well. And he used to describe how the doc would be sitting at the table. Doc was secretary. And the doc would thump the table and he'd say, "Now, lads, this is what we have to do." Imagine addressing all these distinguished scientists, most distinguished in Ireland, addressed as lads. Some of them didn't like it, Frank Mitchell told me, but he told me with great glee that, but the doc saw nothing different about that. There were lads to him the same as the lads maybe in Pearsestown or in Johnstown. So I thought that was very, very funny. Also, to show he was a man of the people, on his first day in Johnstown, an old retainer, in fact, a brother of the man who came in to the classroom holding the gun, Billy Breslin was his name. He addressed the doc as sir, and the doc was shocked. And he said to him, "Billy, that day is gone. That day is gone forever." So that's the sort of man he was. And he was warm and he was charismatic. He was great company. I had a few late nights in Jim Welch's brother Jim Welch's pub in Wexford in the Snug. And there would be a few friends, 5 or 6 people. And the doc was just one of the crowd. We talked about everything, gossip and you name it. We talked about all those things. He enjoyed a few drinks. He enjoyed a sing-song. And every sing-song, 2 songs had to be sung. If you could croak at all, you had to sing Bull of Ogue. And the other one was Kelly from Killan. They had the songs had to finish with those. Anyway, you know, we're supposed to be a nation of begrudgers. I don't think we are anymore. I think we've got over that. And nobody begrudged Doc Welsh all the honours that he received throughout Ireland, honorary degrees, the gold medal, the Boyle medal, the highest honour you can get for scientific endeavour in Ireland, and all. He was honoured many, many times, but there was only one honour that he liked the most, and that was the freedom of the borough of Wexford. And I remember it well. In fact, he discussed it with me. I was working in the headquarters then, and he discussed it with me one day about it. But anyway, it was the ceremony was held in Johnstown Castle, and half the people in Pearsestown were invited, including his old friends. And I remember seeing the doc in his robes and his old friends, whom I knew, of course, they were my friends as well. I knew them all because I had lived with them. And I remember saying to myself, God, I have to get a picture of Doc with all his old pals. And so that's what I arranged. And that's the picture that Mark showed there. You may have missed it, but I see him among his old friends there. And I'm going to leave him there now with all the friends of his youth and all the people of Pearsestown Parish, his own people, as he called them. That's all I have to say.
Thank you very much, Ned. Really lovely words and great memories and great accuracy in your memories as well of the doc. I'm now going to call upon Jerry Boyle to perform the official launch of the book today. So I'll hand straight over to you, Jerry.
Thanks, Mark. I'm not sure what you do for an official launch, but I'll try my best. But first of all, for those of you that will buy the book, and coming after Ned there was a lovely photograph of the doc, including Ned. And it's great to see that that photograph goes back a long time now. I won't say how far back, on page 104 in the book. But it's great to see Ned with such a smile on his face as he had then all those years ago, and with a fantastic sense of humor. And actually that comes through the book as well. And also, I just wanted to react, Mark. I had seen some features of that video before. And one thing I just want to say, Pierce Ryan is mentioned or features in the video, and of course Pierce has passed away recently, and we're going to be in our tea research series coming up shortly. We're going to have a special issue on the soils research at Johnstown Castle, featuring Pierce and of course the doc. Anyway, I've got an official job to do today, is to launch this book, A Man with a Mission, Dr. Tom Walsh. And indeed, as Rosemary has said, he was also not alone a man with a mission, but a man in a tremendous hurry throughout all his life. And I do want to compliment both Rosemary and Ned for writing this book, together, as Rosemary said, with members of her family who contributed some lovely vignettes on the doc as a family man. And we're absolutely delighted to be able to sponsor this work. I think Lance O'Brien said to me, and it's mentioned in the foreword to the book, that it's an absolutely beautiful book, not only in terms of the writing and the production, but I think what clearly comes across to anyone who will read the book is that it was written by two people with a love for the doc. And I think that says an awful lot about the man himself. What I liked about the book is, and I'm sure anyone who reads it will too, it presents a really rounded view of Tom Walsh as a family man, indeed as a countryman, as a GAA man. And by the way, I sympathize with yourselves as well, Ned, for your own travails on the hurling field recently. He was a scientist, of course.
They scored a goal.
He was a scientist, and as Ned points out, he was a born leader and an inspirer of others. And I'm very conscious that I've been fortunate enough to be fifth in line as director since the doc. And I'm sure people like Pierce Ryan, the late Pierce Ryan, Liam Downey, Jim Flanagan, and certainly myself, we all benefited enormously from the doc's legacy in setting down the structures of AFT and ACOT. And as Ned said, it goes beyond structure. He imbued within on Foras Taluntais, and I'm delighted to say it's still the case today, he did imbue a tremendous sense of mission. You know, some said about another walk of life that sometimes can be referred as a profession, but I think we're talking about people that work for Teagasc, whether they be advisors, researchers, educators, support staff, whatever. All of them, in my experience anyway, when I worked in AFT long ago, and more in the last 14 years or so since my work in Teagasc, all of them are imbued with that sense of mission. It's what helps us get up in the morning and with a spring in our step to get into work on a farm trial or on a lab piece of work or in a classroom or out with farmers, as we hope we will be again when this COVID lifts. To do that day in, day out, you have to have that sense of mission. And I think probably that's one of the great legacies of the dock. I'm also very conscious of the dock's commitment to the small industrious farmers, like those in my own parish that I live in now. I'm originally from Borrisoleigh, but I've migrated up the road a bit, up to the hills. I live in the parish of Rare Cross, Kilcommon and Hollyford, and as the book points out, Tom Walsh's first job was as an agriculture advisor in the parish of Rare Cross. And he lived in Newport, 9 miles away, and used to cycle there and back every day. And it's touching that he is still remembered for his winter classes in Rare Cross. And I think he visited Rare Cross about 40 years or so after he had worked there as an advisor on the winter classes. And there was a tremendous turnout in his honor. I was told by a son of one of the farmers that attended the winter classes way back in 1937 that part of the dock's payment anyway was based on the number of students that would turn up to the classes. And I can just imagine the dock canvassing the farmers that did turn up to gather in others to attend the class. I don't know whether it's true or not, but it certainly is it's a good story anyway, and probably certainly characteristic of how the dock would have operated. And I think that commitment to the challenge of farming in an area of the country which is not well endowed by good land, where it's a struggle even to this day, that definitely came through in the dock's articulation of what was needed for the agricultural sector, and more importantly, why it was needed. It was all about enabling farm families to make a decent living, to rear families, to put people through education and bring about improvement. And one thing that comes out in the book, and I think it was also established when we published the Growing Knowledge book that Michael Miley edited so well, Webb, on the 50th anniversary of the foundation of Foras, was the influence that the dock had, and probably one of the most profound and inspirational documents of the 20th century in Ireland. That was economic expansion. And T.K. Whittaker is rightly extolled for his role in that. But 11 of the 24 chapters were to do with agriculture. And there is no doubt in my mind that Whittaker was hugely influenced by the dock. There's no question about that. So if Whittaker deserves to be the man of the 20th century, certainly the dock is well up there with him. So look, the dock's great legacy, for anyone who knew him, you couldn't but be inspired by it. And if you didn't know him, this book will help you to understand even some of his phenomenal achievements. And I think Rosemary is right. I'd like to think that this book will inspire others to go back and look at the scientific work of the dock, because that's only one part of his life. We haven't had a chance today to talk about the work he did when he retired from ACOT, and the esteem that he was held in across a whole variety of areas, and called upon by governments to inject his wisdom and to contribute his views, a range of issues that affected Irish society, to really significant effect in the years following his retirement. And certainly book Rosemary and Ned, it's to provide that inspiration for others, as I say, to look in particular at his scientific achievements. And above all, and I'm sure Rosemary is going to say this anyway in a minute or two, don't forget this book. Isn't that right, Rosemary?
That's it,
Thank you.
exactly.
I'm really happy to officially launch it today. Back to you, Rosemary.
Thank you very much, Jerry. And just to mention that we're joined today by many current and former colleagues in Teagasc. I see Ned Culleton is joining us here, and Matt Dempsey, who spoke during that event, is with us today. And Matt has just said to say thank you for starting with the rock unveiling. It was a wonderful day in Johnstown. And as he said on the day, it was great that he was alive for that day as well. Lance O'Brien joins us also. He says, Ned, thank you for such wonderful presentation on the life of Dr. Walsh. The clarity of recall of key moments from Tom's professional and personal life was a joy to listen to. So, and sincere thanks to Rosemary and everyone for the great job of work you've done in writing this beautiful book. I look forward to reading it over the coming weeks. So some lovely comments coming through there. So yeah, thank you for all the, it's great to see those familiar names appearing there on the list. We have over 60 people joining us here today. So Rosemary, I'm going to maybe ask you to say a few closing remarks for us, and maybe you could give us details as well on how people can actually order the book.
Okay, Mark, I will, of course. Just one word just to say it's very appropriate that we launch this book today, and thank you to Jerry for doing so, because yes, Sunday would have been my father's 107th birthday, and yesterday was his 33rd anniversary. So it is wonderful for me to be able to present this book, and with Ned. Ned and I have so many people to thank, and I hope they are all acknowledged in the book. But we had a very special thanks for Teagasc and Professor Jerry Boyle for their help, encouragement, and very generous sponsorship. And we would like to particularly wish Professor Jerry Boyle a happy and a healthy retirement. Ned and myself are very proud of what we've achieved. I'll be forever grateful to Ned for joining me in doing this project. And we hope you enjoy the read and hear the voice of the man, Tom Walsh, as it comes through. For those who are still interested in buying the book, it's available from the London supermarket in Pearsestown. We had to have it there. The Selsker Bookshop in Wexford. And for those living in the greater Dublin area, my email is rosemarybuckley49@gmail.com if you want to email me, and maybe you can collect it or we can arrange collection. So with that, I'd like to thank you, Mark, for all your help and your work, and everybody involved. And thank you for this, and go buy the book.
Thanks very much, Rosemary.
Mark.
Of course, Ned. Yes.
Mark?
Yes,
Mark?
please go ahead, Ned.
Could I say I forgot something?
Sure.
I want to thank one person in particular who particularly and publicly for the great help that he gave us with this book. It is my friend, Professor Eddie Walsh. He was Professor of Crop Science in UCD. Many of those looking in will remember him. Eddie was a huge help to us in doing this book. And his imprint is to be found right through the book, and particularly on chapter 12, where he summarizes the research work of the Agricultural Institute. Thank you, Eddie, for all your help. And maybe I'll talk to you later this evening.
And Eddie is with us today, so it's I'm sure he has got those remarks. So look, I think we'll bring our proceedings to a close. We're just coming up to 5 o'clock. again, those details, if you want to purchase the book, all you need to do is actually Google "A Man with a Mission, Tom Walsh," and it'll come up for you pretty quickly. Actually, I've done that, and so that search must be going in quite regularly. But I want to pass on my compliments to both Ned and Rosemary on producing this amazing book, and I think it is really great to have this, I suppose, memory of the doc in the format of a book. And we have recorded today's webinar, so we will be putting it up on our YouTube channel as well, if you want to look back, and we'll put some of those video clips onto our YouTube site as well. So with that, thank you all for joining us today, and thank you for the comments that everyone has sent through. Ned Culleton passes on his regards and wishes Jerry Boyle all his best in his retirement as well. So it's there's a few comments, and I couldn't help but noticing that the Tipperary Wexford bit of tension going on there as well. So yeah, it was, I think we call it a draw, I think, at the end of that session. Okay, we'll leave it at that. Thanks very much, everybody, and we will talk to you again. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks.